Hello and welcome to a new kind of woodworking commentary series. This is part one of, well, I don't know how many there'll be because I'm actually still working on the table. But I really wanted to try this style out. In these videos, I'll be diving more into some of my thoughts behind the processes. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. This stage is, of course, the 3D modeling stage. My client and I have talked about this particular project for a few months, but only in the past 2 to 3 weeks did we really get serious about it. The idea is to make a 10 to 12 person dining table with what I've learned from you guys are batwing style legs. As a part of its design, we will be creating a tambour-look. What this means is that the legs won't actually have a tambour system that moves and slides, it'll just look like it. As I work on the 3D model, I'm also going back and forth on Pinterest because my client and I also share a Pinterest board. This was one of the major ways we discussed a bunch of different design concepts and how we decided on a lot of the details. My client really liked the bullnose style, and while we were still going back and forth on the timbre design, I was, in all honesty, trying to find a way to make this part a little easier on myself. I looked up timbres that I could buy, suggested different styles that might be a teeny bit easier to make, but of course, all of these fell short. I think I spent about 4 hours total working on this today, and here is a black and white version of what it'll look like. Making these myself is going to be a lot of work, but when I create custom pieces for my clients, it's more so about whether or not they love the design and if I have the skill to make it. And in this case, I do. And so, I'll go ahead and make it. The adventure, of course, starts off at the lumberyard. A question that I get asked a lot is, where do you get your wood from? And most of the time, I'm here at Houston Hardwoods. The staff here is super helpful and are letting me look through their stock in the back. Whenever I come to take a look at their lumber, I always look through the lumber in the front first. Only after I sifted through all the pieces will I ask to take a look in the back. I think it's more respectful this way, and you never really know what hidden gems you'll find anyways. It's not like they're hiding all the pieces in the back or something. Or are they? In the time lapses, you can see how I'm looking through every single piece. I'm measuring, scanning, and really paying attention to each piece of wood and how they'll interact with the pieces I put in my maybe pile. And it's not like all of these pieces are bad. The kinds of pieces I'll pick anyways depends on the type of project I'm working on and where the piece will be utilized. Because it's a time lapse, it might seem like I'm moving through this rather quickly, but I believe that this footage has been sped up at least 2,000 times. So yes, I am really taking my time. You can see in this clip how fast I'm actually moving. After 2.5 hours here, I found all the pieces I needed for the tabletop. If you can't tell by all the sweat, it was a bit of a workout to move all those pieces around. Because I don't have a large enough vehicle yet, I will be having these delivered to my home. And this is what I'm calculating the total to be for the materials on the tabletop alone. Fast forward a few days and we are here at my house with the delivery of the walnut pieces. I really can't say enough about how much I appreciate this service. I do plan on getting a van or truck one day, and as of this current moment, I am leaning towards a van. What this also means is that one day I may not be utilizing their delivery option anymore. Until then, this is a blessing and has been crucial in helping me get on my feet. In this batch, I had a mixture of 9, 10, and 11 feet long boards. My very first step then is to get all of these boards to a similar length to each other. Outside, I laid all the pieces next to each other on the floor. This is because it's the only space that will be big enough for me to look at everything at the same time. I paid attention to the ends of the longer pieces and the places where the sapwood meet the heartwood. From these spots, I determined which ends and parts were less usable and marked them all with a wax crayon. Once these cuts were determined, my next step is to cut them on the miter saw. Whenever I cut a board that is thicker than 4/4, I always cut them in either 2 or 3 rounds. The reason for this is because with wood that is thicker or more dense, you might get a lot of resistance when you cut them with the miter saw. If you try to force it all the way through in one round, you might get some kickback. That's why it's ideal to cut it in 2 to 3 steps. There were also a couple boards that seemed to have a slightly bowed edge, so with a straight edge and a flush trim router bit, I straightened them out. Then, with the table saw and a featherboard, I cut the last edge on all the pieces to the width that I needed. You might have also noticed my partner running around in these videos. That's because at this point in time, doing these time-lapse videos was still new to him, and he wasn't quite sure how to set things up without him getting into the shot. These days, he's figured it out, so you won't see him as much anymore. But until it gets to that point in these videos, you'll get to see him running around, getting shots, and running back inside to continue editing. In some of the previous shots, you might have seen me from time to time picking at some smaller knots. This one wasn't a knot, but rather a hole with bark stuck in it, so I had to spend some dedicated time towards it. With knots, I always check to see if it's loose or stable. If it's stable and adds character, I'll keep it. If it's loose, I'll remove it and fill it with resin. I noticed there was a little piece that jutted out on one side of the hole. The more I started digging towards it, the further I noticed it going underneath. I didn't want to break that piece off, so I stayed careful, using a flat screwdriver, an awl, and a 1/4-inch wide chisel. I gotten quite a few comments about my using a flat screwdriver for this process. And you know what? It did a great job. I tried apologizing to it, but it rejected my apology and told me it was actually happy to have gotten to help out. In fact, it even asked me to use it for more tasks other than screwing things, like opening paint cans. Anyways, all that is to say it's gonna be okay. The screwdriver is good, I'm good, everything's good. When I finally got the bark out, it was a pretty satisfying feeling. It felt like I'd unplugged the booger or gotten out some earwax that had been gunked up for the longest time. Once I got all the lumbers cut down to size and cleaned up, it was time to work on the layout. My goal during this stage is to figure out the best way to put these pieces together. Whenever I get lumber, there's never a guarantee that the lumber I get all come from the same tree. Despite me spending a lot of time to pick out the best pieces to match each other, after cutting things down to size, I still need to pay additional attention to the grain patterns and colors to determine the most seamless transition between the pieces. It's like solving a puzzle. I rotate him, turn him, flip him, and continuously mix and match until I get a result that feels like a single unit, like they were meant to be this way. One thing that caught me off guard about these particular walnut pieces was the effect of light. Depending on where you stood, the color of the walnut looked completely different, making certain combinations unusable. This was very interesting to see at first, but for sure added much more time to the process. Once I got the setup I was happy with, I finished up by making marks and numbers on the boards so I don't lose it. With the layout done, the next step is the glue up. Ever since I started woodworking, glue ups have always given me the most anxiety. Because of that, I'll always do what I can to make this process a little less stressful. For this tabletop, I'll accomplish this by doing the glue up in sections. There are 6 total boards and I'll be gluing up 2 pieces at a time. Once I get 3 pieces of 2, I'll glue 2 of those up and then attach the last piece to the other 2. And here's my first out of 5 glue ups I'll be doing. I marked my spots and whipped out my handy dandy domino machine to make slots in the lumber. Before I make a move, I always like to do a dry fitting. It's like doing a rehearsal, making sure everything looks good before the big event. The only struggle with this process is taking the dominoes back out. It usually requires a lot of jiggling and yanking to get them out, but once I got them out and put all my dominoes in a row, I began to glue up. I think I put about 16 inches between each of the dominoes. And while there may be an actual proper spacing for this, I simply went with my instinct here. Regardless, I made sure not to get too close to either end of the boards. Because I'm working with extra length, I'll be deciding what parts to cut off later on. The last thing I'd want to happen is to find out I'd cut through the middle of one of the dominoes. Dominoes are helpful for alignment, but in the places where there aren't dominoes, I still use cauls. I sometimes wonder if this is being a little too extra, but you know what? It helps me calm down, and that's all that matters. After getting these glued up, the first of 5 stages is finally done.